42nd, which means they're rotating out the 291st to 70th to get them back there, get them up to strength, and then go into reserve. But they haven't committed the bulk of about 200,000 Russian reserves that are trained, organized, ready to rock. They haven't been committed. The Ukrainians are out of everything. They don't have anything left. Yeah, 31 Abrams. That's it. They threw in their last elite brigades to try and take Robotyno and shift over. They're done now. There's no oomph left in this thing. The counteroffensive is over. And it's been a strategic defeat for the Ukrainians, for the collective West. And I think what we're going to see now is that the Russians, having absorbed the Ukrainian blow, are going to slowly go on the counteroffensive and begin to put pressure on the Ukrainians. The idea is you attack here, force Ukrainians to send reserves over there. Now, remember, the Russians have 200,000 reserves they can send in, so they can plus up troops here, attack. Ukrainians don't have anybody left, so they're going to have to steal troops, rob Peter to pay Paul, send troops up to fill that gap. And the Russians are monitoring that. And they say, well, they're thin here. Let's hit here. Now they break through. They have to steal more units. The Ukrainians come in to seal that break. But that means there's a weak spot up here. The Russians then will attack there. The Russians will be on the initiative from now on. And eventually the Ukrainian line is going to collapse. And they're probably going to have to retreat beyond the Dnieper River and surrender a whole bunch of territory to the Russians. That's the direction this thing's going. And I just think that, the Ukrainians have suffered a strategic defeat, and that means the collective West has suffered a strategic defeat. A lot of people talk now about a frozen war. That's what they want. They want to freeze the war. Why in God's name would Russia freeze the war? A frozen war implies we need to catch our breath. Russia doesn't need to catch their breath. Russia has been doing everything right. They've been absorbing everything that NATO and Ukraine was throwing at them without suffering heavy casualties. I mean, they've suffered significant casualties, but nothing like the Ukrainians. Combat units that suffer between 50 and 69% casualties become combat ineffective. The vast majority of the Ukrainian brigades that have been committed to this counteroffensive become combat ineffective, which means they had to be pulled back and they have to suck resources that could have otherwise been used to create a new reserve force, suck them in to get those units back up to speed. We've seen brigades being rotated out 3 to 4 times during this counteroffensive, which means 3 to 4 times this brigade's about 4,000 or 5,000 guys, has suffered between 50 and 70% casualties. Do the math. That's a lot of casualties. The Russians, on the other hand, they've had some units take some hits. They've rotated them out, but they have fresh, intact units to come in and plug those holes, and they still have a whole bunch of those fresh units to use as they see fit. And that's the direction right now. War is an extension of politics by other means. And I've always said that while the Russians will defeat the Ukrainian army, this war won't end until you have a political solution. And I always believe that what would happen is first the Ukrainian army would be destroyed, and then you'd see the collapse of the Ukrainian government. But things are looking like maybe the collapse of the Ukrainian government may come first. I don't know. Did you see the interview that Zelensky's wife gave? Recently?
Yes, I have the clip of the very last question. It's only about a minute. Maybe we should play it because I think
it's a good time to play it.
Yeah, because it's incredibly telling of where things are in the conflict. Let me find
and politically.
Yes, politically. So here it is. Here's Face the Nation. All right, I'm not for copyright purposes. I won't max screen it, but let's play the video. This is just I have it fast forwarded to the very last question where she's going to ask about what she would think about her husband, Vladimir Zelensky, running in 2024, which, mind you, I just want to point out to the audience, this is something the United States is pressuring. This is not necessarily something Zelensky is saying, oh, we should have elections. That's, given the behavior of the Ukrainian government, I think it's quite clear that with all the opposition parties banned, that they don't want to have elections. Zelensky doesn't want them, but the U.S. has been pressuring this slowly but surely, especially in the last several months. So here we go.
President Zelensky and your family have become synonymous with Ukraine. When people in America think of Ukraine, they think of President Zelensky and your family. How would you feel about him running again in 2024 if elections are held?
Це дуже складне для мене
Well, this is
запитання.
a very difficult
Знаєте,
question
що
for me.
я не була прихильницею його
Even when he ran for the first time, I didn't fully endorse it. But if he runs again, if he runs for the second time, if he decides that it is necessary, well, we have some experience. We've been there. It is not as scary as it was in the first time. I don't know whether he has made this decision or not. It will depend on the situation in our country and the situation and the possibility of organizing free and fair elections. It will also depend whether our society would need him as a president. If he will feel that Ukrainian society will no longer wish him to be the president, he will probably not run. But I will support him, whatever decision he takes.
Whatever decision. Madam.
So
look, how many wartime leaders could you imagine? There's only been one in my experience, and that was Lyndon Johnson, who refused to run for a second term during the Vietnam War. And the main reason is because he realized the United States was losing in Vietnam, and he didn't, he had been lied to by McNamara, and he had lost all confidence in his ability to go forward. But generally speaking, wartime leaders are like, rally around me, I'm the guy, boom. Winston Churchill, running for election during the Second World War, kept winning. She sounded defeated, and this is the point. Zelensky is a defeated politician right now. Look, they have this major divorce taking place with Poland right now, which is huge. Nobody's really talking about it, but it's a deal. You see the Western European countries starting to say, we got nothing left for you. Europe is fractured. Even in the United States, we have our entire budget being held hostage by Ukraine. That's going to lead to some sort of crisis unless a solution is found to this. But his days are done. And so what I think we're going to see sooner rather than later is we're going to see political collapse before we see military collapse. That's just a guess. And I think the Russians are looking at that, and they're thinking this, if they agree, let's say if the Russians have a similar assessment, then they're not going to go pedal to the metal militarily, because they're sacrifice thousands of lives when you can get accomplished what you want to accomplish simply by putting a little bit of pressure on and waiting for Zelensky to fall. If they thought Zelensky was dug in, a wartime leader, impossible to evict politically, then you'd see the Russians taking more risks, I think, on the battlefield now that they've crushed the Ukrainian counteroffensive. But I think that we're probably going to see the Russians. There will be no frozen conflict. I mean, Lavrov and Putin have made that clear, that Russia's, and there won't be a negotiated settlement. That has flown as well. What there will be is unconditional surrender. And that unconditional surrender will happen when Zelensky is removed, because he is an impediment to the conclusion of this conflict. He's no longer part of the solution. He's purely the problem. And, how he's removed is yet to be seen. I think for the sake of his wife and his kids, I'd like him to resign and flee the country. If he tries to hold on too long, I think he could find himself on the receiving end of the fury of Ukrainian officers who feel betrayed by his incompetence, especially when it becomes clear just how corrupt he is and how corrupt his government is. There's a growing, everybody knows it's there, but there's a growing resentment over this. There are people who aren't getting their pensions paid, people who aren't getting the health care they need because of the corruption. The United States is fully funding. There's the irony. Here in the United States, we have people who can't get health care. We have infrastructure problems. We have education problems, the whole thing. But in Ukraine, we're funding the entire country. We're paying every salary in the civil service. We're paying every salary in the military. We're funding the health care. We're funding their veterans affairs. We're funding we're paying the Nazi salaries. And as an American, I take umbrage at this. I'm like, wait a minute. If you're going to do that there, first do it here. Let's take care of the immigration problem. Let's take care of the dirty water up in Flint, Michigan. Let's take care of the homeless problem. Let's take care of all those junkies on the street in San Francisco and Los Angeles. Let's take care of America before we start taking care of Ukraine. It's going to become a political problem. I think Zelensky sees the writing on the wall, and that's why his wife. That was not a happy woman answering that question. Everybody could read the body language for themselves, but that's not a woman that was overly confident in what the future held for her and her husband.